Uh, Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for the heads up about like what the UBI is and the campaign which you're running for. It's very interesting that at a place where there's a future of education at 42, you're talking about like future of work, and one of the reasons they got me to on the panel was I'm part of a 42 startup which also works on future of work. So the first time when I heard about you was when you had mentioned about the GDP is a very bad metric. That was the first time when I heard about you, and you said median income is what we should be looking at, and those are the two aspects which in our startup also we cover. So just when we talk about the universal basic income, Andrew, could you just tell us about, like, we want to just talk about the idea of, was this tested before in the history? If it has been tested before, why it did not work then, and what's new now?
Sure, so universal basic income, a lot of people associate it with futurists and technologists, but if you look at it, Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, and then in the 60s, Martin Luther King was for it, Milton Friedman was for it, and it passed the House of Representatives in 1971 under Richard Nixon. I shit you not, you can look it up. Like they actually made it so like a minimum income for all families like passed the House of Representatives twice. And it failed in the Senate because Senate Democrats wanted a higher income floor. And one of them told me later that that was the biggest mistake they ever made. They should have just like taken that deal. And then shortly thereafter, Alaska implemented it where every adult now gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year from oil money. And that was a Republican governor who said to the people of Alaska, who would you rather get the money, the government or you? And then the people of Alaska were like, us. And he was like, yeah, I thought so. So you ask about where this has been rolled out. It's been rolled out successfully in Alaska for 36 years. And now everyone loves it. It's created thousands of jobs. It's improved children's health. It's decreased income inequality. And it's wildly popular in a deeply conservative Republican state. So think about that one for a second. They love it so much that a majority of Alaskans would accept higher taxes if it meant keeping their dividend or raising their dividend. So if you look at the implementations, it's happened for 36 years here, but there have been studies now all over the world, and I summarize them in my book, where if you put money into people's hands, nutrition goes up, graduation rates go up, mental health goes up, to your point over there, mental health goes up, domestic violence goes down, relationships improve, hospital visits go down. Just generally life gets a little bit better and a little bit less shitty if you put $1,000 a month into people's hands.
Right. So building on that, when you said about Alaska and the oil economy, so before coming here, I was working for Amazon in the Middle East. The Middle Eastern countries also have this kind of a basic, the governments give out like the free money. One of the downsides of it is like people become very lethargic, and the work ethic is kind of goes down. So what would your counter, how do you kind of plan to solve this?
Yeah, so one of the distinctions is that in some of the oil-rich companies in the Middle East, their cash stipend is pretty significant relative to work. So everyone here, if I were to give you $1,000 a month, none of you would think like, oh, I'm going to retire on that. You know what I mean? Because like that's below the poverty line. I mean, the poverty line in the U.S. is $12,770 a year. $1,000 a month is the equivalent of getting paid like $6 an hour. And like no one's like, oh, I'm going to sit pretty on that amount of money. So even if you're, let's say, a server in a restaurant who's getting paid $24,000 a year, are you going to quit your job if I give you $1,000 a month? No, because that'd be a 50% pay cut. All of a sudden you can't pay your bills. But if you keep your job and you get another 12, then maybe you cut back on one shift, you save a little money, you take your kid out, for dinner one night a week, and like life improves. But it's not going to be a work replacement because no one's going to think that they can prosper on $1,000 a month. And so the data shows that only two groups work less in this situation. New mothers who spend more time with their children and teenagers who graduate at higher levels. And I think those are outcomes we'd all be pretty excited about.
Right. So giving like $1,000, one of the one of the main critiques has been like, even if you consider the homelessness problem in San Francisco, the people who, out of necessity, they kind of steal laptops or whatever, the money which they make out of it, they don't spend that into like very constructive ways of building a new business or anything. They spend it on drugs and just as an escape from reality. So what do you think, like this $1,000, is it going to make people more towards that?
Well, in a way, you just summarized the issue, which is like people will get desperate and do various things, like get a hold of money. Like so, even if you put money in their hands, then the odds of them becoming functional, let's say not stealing, would certainly go up. But the other thing is that it would make it so that everyone's worth something. So that, let's say I'm an entrepreneur and there's like a homeless person on the street right now. Like right now, there's no monetary reward for my trying to like get that person to become functional again. Like, you know what I mean? But like, if I know that that person's entitled to $1,000 a month, if I can get them on their feet and like plug them in, like Citibank will actually like pay me to help get this person like integrated into society. Then like all of a sudden you like change the incentives, because the problem right now is that the marketplace does not value humans intrinsically. Like it values us for our ability to contribute economically. But right now, AI is going to make it so that fewer and fewer people are going to be able to succeed in that marketplace. And you can see it right now. It's like eroding people's value. And then people are looking at each other and struggling. And so what we have to do is we have to start valuing people like as human beings, regardless of whether or not the market thinks that they can code or or whatever it is. And then we can create incentives for even entrepreneurs to want to help restore some degree of functionality to even people that right now are completely dysfunctional, addicted to drugs, on the street, et cetera.
Right. So people always wondered if like $1,000 has been given, then they might just resort to playing video games and drugs and all that stuff. So that's where I was kind of coming from, that question. So Andrew, just tell us about, like, if you've done on the math of like giving $1,000, what is the total fund is going to be, and where is it going to come from?
Right. So $1,000 a month for 18 to 64-year-old Americans ends up with a headline cost of around $2.5 trillion per year, give or take. For context, the economy is $19 trillion, and the federal budget's $4 trillion. So if I say to you $2.5 trillion, you think, wow, that's like a lot in context. But if you break it down, it becomes actually very, very affordable. So the first thing is that we currently spend about $800 billion on existing welfare programs, which ends up reducing the headline cost, because if someone's currently getting benefits, then you end up just like swapping dollar for dollar. So that brings the cost down to like a little less than $2 trillion. Now the big move we have to make, the big change we have to make, and I'm going to ask you all, who are going to be the big winners from artificial intelligence, self-driving cars and trucks, big data, et cetera, et cetera? Like, who wins? Sorry? Which corporations? FANG, yeah, FANG. It took me a second to say what you were saying. So FANG, the acronym for Facebook, Amazon, Apple,
Netflix, and
Google. Oh yeah, there are two A's in there. It's like FANG. So it's like the really, really big tech companies, like the trillion-dollar companies. Now the trap we're in right now as a country is that those companies and AI are going to soak up more and more work and value, but the public is not going to see any new tax revenue as a result, because these companies are great at not paying a whole lot of tax. Amazon says didn't make any profits this quarter, no taxes. Google says it all went through Ireland, no taxes here in the US. And I don't begrudge them this, because it's their job to make as much money as they can, and so they just like, move things around. But this is a really, really precarious situation for us to be in as a society, because if these guys end up soaking up more and more like retail jobs and truck driving jobs, et cetera, and then the public looks around and is like, we don't have any resources. So the big change we have to make is we have to do what every other advanced economy in the world has already done, which is implement a value-added tax. And with a value-added tax, then the public would get a sliver of every robot truck mile driven, every Amazon transaction, every Google search. And because our economy is so vast now at $19 trillion, a value-added tax at even half the average European level would generate almost $1 trillion in new revenue. and that money would end up going into people's hands and then strengthening the consumer economy. So at this point down, you're down to like a little less than $1 trillion you're looking for. And then the last two steps you guys are gonna love the most. Right now, 57% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. Think about that for a sec. So if you put $1,000 a month into their hands, what's gonna happen to that $1,000? They're gonna spend it. They're gonna spend it in the economy. It's gonna go into businesses. It's gonna grow the consumer economy by about $2 trillion. And then we get back 500 billion of that in new tax revenue, because that's the ratio of new economic activity to tax revenue. So now you're down to like about 400 billion that you're looking for to make this deficit neutral. And the last 400 billion you get because of the fact you're spending less on incarceration, homelessness services, healthcare, emergency room healthcare, because like people like don't just show up in the emergency room as much anymore. And you invest in your human capital. You have higher graduation rates, better physical health, better mental health. There's one estimate that showed if you were to alleviate gross poverty, you would increase GDP by $700 billion just on the basis of having a more healthy and productive workforce. So in those ways, you get back the last 400 billion or so, and then it's deficit neutral. But I will suggest that money is something of a social construction, and that if the majority of citizens of a democracy declared themselves a dividend, there's absolutely nothing stopping us from doing it. So there's not like necessarily like this entire like, oh, like, you know, I mean, we can make it happen, but you can't, this thing will pay for itself in many ways, even if you're conservative about it, as long as you implement some way to harness the gains from AI and new technologies.
So when you talk about like the value-added taxes, if people are not going to have jobs, whom are you going to tax? Are you going to tax the robots or?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's the whole point. But part of it too is that right now the consumer economy is faltering in part because people don't have money to spend. So I just spoke to a group of CEOs with the same case, and they're like, it's enlightened self-interest to put money into my consumers' hands, because like if they don't have money, then you know, who am I going to sell to?
Could you talk more about like taxing these robots, because even Bill Gates was mentioning about this. So is it going to be the value-added tax is going to come out of it, right? Is it going to be like the productivity of it, or how do you determine what is the net throughput of a robot?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one of the issues, like someone suggested like a robot tax or an AI tax, but the issue is that it's really, really hard to measure a lot of that stuff. And if you go into like a CVS and see like an iPad replace a cashier, is that like taxable? Like, you know, you end up having like a very difficult set of issues. Whereas a VAT, and I've talked to various technologists and leaders on this, and they prefer a VAT because it's more like benign and distributed than if you were to try and single out like AI or robots individually, which is harder to measure, harder to implement, and then you'd have to have a much higher tax rate, and you might genuinely discourage some of that stuff. Whereas like a VAT that's pretty gentle ends up accomplishing a lot of the same goals without singling out like a particular company or industry.
So this VAT is primarily on the companies, or if it's going to also be on people, what would be the net effective amount out of the $1,000, like $1,000 minus whatever?
Yeah, so it would end up, the VAT ends up reducing the impact of the $1,000 slightly, but like the vast majority of Americans would be able to retain like 80 to 90% of the purchasing power, and it would increase the economic purchasing power of the bottom 90% of Americans. It's only if you're like making a ton and like buying yachts and stuff that the VAT would actually be more than like $1,000 a month in essence. So, Andrew, there's this strong argument which is often made of, say you go to watch a rock show or something, and if one person starts standing on his toes, right, then everyone else starts standing on his toes, and effectively the view which you get is still the same. So it's like universal basic income, like something of standing on the toes, in which the guy now has to put like extra effort to get the same view. Yeah, you know, it's incredible the impact $1,000 a month would have on the day-to-day circumstances of tens of millions of Americans. And if you've been around the country the way I have, you see the circumstances many, many Americans are living in. And like, it would be really, really impactful. So there are some people that say like, hey, with the suggestion you just made, which is like, hey, give everyone $1,000, it'll just like somehow like get inflated away or balanced out. Like the numbers really just don't show that. And there have been tons of studies where people have gotten $1,000, and again, you see them spend it on themselves, their families, like things just get healthier and better, and there's no reason that would change if you gave money to a lot of different people. It would just mean that more people would be able to take better care of themselves and their families.
So in your book, The War on the Normal People, you said about like why universal basic income is one of the best ways to go about, because one of the things the government does very well is to distribute the money to directly, so that it goes to the people. Can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so one of the problems is that our politicians pretend we can do things we can't do. Like if a politician stands up and says we need to educate Americans on the jobs of the future, it's like, that'd be great, but we can't really do that because anytime we try, we suck at it. So one of my friends, Andy Stern, said something that really stuck with me, and I think you might agree with this. He said the government is terrible at many, many things, but it is excellent at sending large numbers of checks to large numbers of people. So we have to lean into one of the few things our government could actually do in real life that would help people, and then like get money into your hands, and then you would do great things with it. Just like they did in Alaska, like over this last number of decades, like we can do throughout the country. And I would suggest to you all, Alaska did it with oil money. What is the oil of the 21st century? Data, AI, it's like, so we can take what Alaska did with oil and do the same thing with big data and AI.
Is universal basic income is one of the solutions which you're kind of saying about, like, because what is inevitable is the AI automation, right? Is there something which could be solved at the cost level of it instead of going to the effects and then looking at an income?
Yeah, so I mentioned before the manufacturing workers in the Midwest. How many of you all studied economics in college? I did. A few of you. So the economics textbook said that if you were to get rid of lots of jobs, then those workers would get retrained and get new jobs, then the economy would grow. Those of you who didn't take economics, that's what it says. So then when you dig into what actually happened to the 4 million manufacturing workers who lost their jobs in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, that didn't really happen. About half of them left the workforce and never worked again, and then about a half of the ones that left the workforce filed for disability. So when you talk about trying to prevent this stuff from happening, we're already in the middle of it. We got rid of manufacturing workers, we're getting rid of retail workers. By the time it gets to truck drivers, then it's going to be like chaos and madness and violence. So to me, we don't really have that many great choices, but certainly one terrible choice would be to somehow like outlaw self-driving trucks or something like that. Because that's really just shooting yourself in the foot, where you're literally just like making yourself less efficient to try and just give people stuff to do. And 4,000 Americans die in accidents with truck drivers right now. So you're literally saying, like, I'd rather, you know what I mean? Like there are moral arguments for trying to automate truck driving. And in an alternate reality, we're all celebrating with the truck drivers. It's like great news. You don't have to drive a truck anymore. It's like, because sitting in a truck for 11 hours a day, like, it's really bad for your health. It's really rough on you. But of course, right now, the problem is that those truck drivers get paid $46,000 a year and they're high school graduates, and their opportunity after truck driving is going to be, does anyone want to say what their next opportunity is going to be? Nobody fucking knows what their next opportunity is, right? You look at it and be like, oh, what is the job for like 3.5 million 50-year-old men like who've been driving a truck for like, no one knows. So like we have to try and, again, move the clock forwards, or else we're going to wind up in that sort of disastrous situation where politicians are saying you can't do this, you can't do that, because they're trying to protect jobs. We have to try and protect people, not jobs, if you know what I mean.
One other argument, Andrew, is this incentivizing people just for giving like a universal basic income. Is it kind of a very anti-Darwinian, in which people, if they're not able to adapt, those should eventually, that's how the evolution moves forward?
I haven't heard that. I got cut off. It's Trump. No, I'm back. All right. You guys I hope you get this sense. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I love capitalism. And I'm going to convey something that Eric Weinstein, who you guys may have heard of, he's like Peter Thiel's chief economist. He lives here in the Bay Area, like he and I are friendly.
Oh, he runs the Thiel Capital as well.
Yeah, he runs
the
Thiel
managing
Capital.
director.
So he said two things that really stuck with me and that speak to this question. Number one, he said, we did not realize that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology. And two, he said, we need to become both radically capitalist in some respects and radically socialist in others. It just depends upon the area. So to me, like the sort of Darwinian survival of the fittest stuff, it's like just an oversimplification. Like there's no such thing as like a pure, unfettered system. And to me, it would be ridiculous to suggest that like if someone fails to adapt in this circumstance, because like AI doesn't distinguish. Like if someone was a brilliant radiologist and spent a decade deciphering radiology films and they were world class, they're still gonna lose because AI can see shades of gray that human eyes cannot. It can reference millions of films instead of thousands. And so you can't go to that radiologist and be like, hey, you weren't adaptable. I mean, like that person was like the top of their field and like, like went through like the absolute best. So it would be ridiculous to say, one of the things I say, it's not like the truck drivers got dumb and lazy overnight. It's just that their trucks start driving themselves. So it's not a relationship between like character or choices or morality. It's just the fact that technology is getting very, very powerful.
So interesting that because you say about the radiologist, and that's one of the things which we often cover about, like they pay 500 grand, practice for 10 years, and there's not going to be any jobs, right? So, and the AI automation is going to come after the jobs which are very highly paid. Yeah. So do you think like fundamentally the schools and the curriculum should be changing, or do it like more like the 42 way in which you do stuff which parallel?
Hell yes. I mean 42, holy cow. Like this thing is genius. And I love, and it's free. Like those, like the best of all worlds. So I think that what's gone on has been really immoral in terms of the education industrial complex in many, many parts of the economy. Like why has college gotten 2.5 times more expensive since even I went? Has it gotten 2.5 times better? No. So when you dig into the numbers, you guys will probably know why. It's not professors. It's not even facilities. It's bureaucrats and administrators. The number of non-academic administrators has gone up 250% as tuition's gone up 250%. And so what they did is they got really expensive, and then they go to families and be like, hey, you got to pay more. And then families feel like they have no choice, so they borrow more, and the government's like, here's the money. And then you end up with 1.5 trillion in school loans and a default rate that's up to like 12% and 38K in average debt. And it's immoral. Like it's totally jacked up and immoral, but there's like no accountability. And so I completely think that this sort of structure is the future. The fact that it's free or low cost, the fact that it's peer driven, the fact that it's based around like what opportunities there are. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, and there's so few like teachers and staffers here. It's like the reverse of this administrative creep that I'm describing that has taken place in most schools.
Right. So we just got like 3 minutes left. Andrew, is there any closing thoughts which you want to leave with for the audience?
All right, guys. This is so much fun. So if I'm you all, I'm thinking like, wow, this guy's sort of interesting. Like, can he actually become president of the United States? Like, unknown. That's probably what I'm thinking. All right. So check it out. I'm a serial entrepreneur and operator. I'm like, figuring out like what the key levers are. So our political system in the US is like a giant set of pipes that are clogged full of money. And nothing can get through. But just like in a good movie or like, story, if you climb through the porthole, there's like a vulnerability. It's like a Death Star. So I figured out what the vulnerability is. And you climb through that porthole and you wind up in Iowa. Those of you who don't know how the democratic system works, like Iowa is the first state to vote. So there are 3.1 million. I've been to Iowa 5 times, and I'm going back to the 6th next week. So you go to Iowa, there are 3.1 million Iowans. Guess how many Iowans participated in the Democratic caucus in 2016, either percent or absolute number? Just guess a percent. What percentage of Iowans participated in the Democratic caucus last cycle? 17, 20. 85. The real answer is 5.6%. 170,000 Iowans participated. All right, so let's say interest goes up and 200,000 participate in 2020. Now, if you're keeping track of this at all, they're going to be like 20 plus Democratic candidates, right? It's going to be a freaking madhouse. Everyone's running. So I get to Iowa and I'm like, okay, there are 200,000 Iowans that are going to participate in this thing. How many Iowans do I need to finish first if the field is like 20 candidates? Between 30 and 40,000. Because in a crowded field, like you get 40,000, you probably won the whole thing. So I've been to Iowa and I go to them and I say, hey guys, have you noticed stores closing where you live? They're all like, yes. It's like, why is that? Amazon, yeah, that's right. Is that gonna get better or worse? It's gonna get much worse. Yeah, that's right. What are you gonna do about it? And they're like, what can we do about it? We're just fucking Iowans. And then I'm like, I can tell you what you're gonna do about it. You're gonna make me president. I'm gonna get $1,000 into each of your hands that's right now getting sucked up over to Seattle. You're gonna be able to build your community and your economy back from your families up, like a trickle-up economy, and give your kids a reason to stay here. What do you think about that? And then they freaking go apeshit, and then they start like applauding and loving it, and then putting their names down. I can get 40,000 Iowans on board with the idea that them getting $1,000 a month is a good idea. And so if I do that, I'm telling you guys, it's a crystal ball. January 2020, world headlines are gonna be the Asian man who wanted to give everyone money just won Iowa. This face, front page news, and then the whole thing like takes on historic proportions because things can reverse like this. Again, I'm an entrepreneur and I know how this stuff works. Like you go from being the moonshot, it's like that people are like, that's interesting but not gonna happen, to all of a sudden like the greatest story that everyone wants to jump onto and make history with. So that's exactly how it's going to go down, guys. One of the things that we're going to announce next week, Sam Altman of Y Combinator is endorsing me and coming out for the campaign. I'm getting the techies. I'm getting the Asians, because I am the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat. And I just want to say, too, Asian Americans, 5.8% of the country. In a crowded field, that's significant, right? Right? I'm getting young people like yourselves. And I'm getting this group that's called like loosely the intellectual dark web, which I also call the tribe of reason, because people that like facts and like data like me, because I'm just trying to fix the problems. So that's what I wanted to end on and say to the guys that like it seems like a long shot. I can see the path very, very clearly. And if you would like to join me in this journey, please do go to yang2020.com. Just put like your name down, like Venmo us $1, but just like stick a pin in me in this campaign because I want you to share in this journey. It's gonna be so much fun. And then we're gonna round up again January 2020 when this headline I'm telling you about is going to be the front page news around the world. So thank you all very, very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for coming over, and we wish you all the best.